Hello, I wanted to do this video as a response to what I think was last week's Women's Hour. I'll leave it in the description below so you can go and watch it if you haven't watched it already. I found myself quite enjoying this episode of Women's Hour because I agreed with a lot and disagreed with a lot as to what was being said, and I still found it very interesting. So I'll just go through what I agreed with and what good points were raised and what I disagreed with and why. I certainly agreed with the main point of it, that it is in poor taste to slag women off online, and it does look weak, and it does generally make the movement look bad. I've said this, AA's said this, and quite a lot of other people in the sensible centrist sphere have said this. You shouldn't be slagging women off online because it looks weak and it just puts people off. By the same token, it also puts people off when you use terms like they when referring to the cathedral or the octopus or the network of NGOs, finance and the media. In private or in our own spaces, using they is fine because most people, if not all people, should know what you're on about. But to the word they, when you're talking about the cathedral or the octopus, it makes it very easy for someone who isn't familiar with the spaces and isn't familiar with the reading to say, by they you mean the Jews, or you mean the whatever. So global American empire is generally my preferred term, or the octopus, but even the term the octopus I do get quite concerned about because there are links and aspersions that can be uncharitably sought with the term octopus back to the mid-century Germans. So, though octopus is a good term and it's a very descriptive term, I generally don't like it as a term, but I use it anyway, so I'm a bit of a hypocrite in that sense. Another point that was brought up is men get tamed by women, and this is sort of true, if not mostly true. I would certainly agree with it. And I generally hold the view that men should not let themselves get tamed by women. This is for two reasons. Women, and babies as well, release hormones that lowers your testosterone level. So, to some extent, you can't help it. But also, a woman cooking for you and telling you what to do and organising your schedule is generally going to make you less able to do business and be less of a formidable individual. So, that's why I'm against it. Some of my sensible centrist friends ask their wife or their girlfriend before we can hang out. So there's quite a few people in the sensible cent who I message and say, oh, I'm in your area, do you want to hang out? Oh, let me ask my wife first. 2 days later, well, I've asked my wife and she says it can only be for 2 hours between the hours of 9 and 11 because we're out for lunch at 1 with whatever person. Generally, I don't think you should let your wife organise your schedule. I'm not saying you shouldn't consider her when writing your schedule. However, letting her have the complete monopoly on who you spend your time with isn't really a good look, certainly to other men. I mean, there are of course exceptions to this, but as a general rule, you shouldn't be letting your wife run your schedule. As some of you may know, my hobbies are rock and ice climbing and judo and a little bit of kickboxing. What I've noticed with a lot of the men I know who are married or have children, they're not really up for doing expeditions or going climbing outdoors as much as they used to be. And this is because they're too comfortable with their wife or their wife complains about it. Something like that. And I think that you should actively resist your wife or your girlfriend's attempts to soften you up. This is not to say that you should be a caveman, a thug, a brute, and beat up your wife or girlfriend whenever they annoy you. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, when your girlfriend or wife says to you, oh, I don't want you going ice climbing outdoors, or I don't want you going rock climbing outdoors, certainly not trad climbing, you have to say no and create a boundary there, because otherwise you'll go soft. And especially if you're actively involved in the sensible centre, you can't be soft, because other people, political enemies, will take advantage of you, if not friends, as a punishment for going weak, going soft even. Another aspect that was brought up is there's lots of bad online dating advice, and I would agree with that. But I think to come up with better dating advice, especially from a female point of view, you need to understand why dating advice is so popular. And the main reason is lots of men realise that everything they're told about dating is complete BS. So I know I certainly was, and I know lots of men that were told, oh, just be a gentleman and you'll bump into the one. It'll be great. That's how you find a girlfriend or a wife. And I don't think I really need to tell the male members of my audience that's complete BS. It's complete nonsense. Nobody has ever just bumped into the one by accident. There are no ones. There are people who you may be compatible with, and there'll be people who you will totally be uncompatible with. And finding the one, or finding a woman you want to marry, is hard work on both parts. You have to work hard to form a relationship and get her into your frame. And I don't mean in a way that could be construed as abusive, but you have to find a way of leading a relationship that she's comfortable with. And then she has to make herself seem as if she, or at the very least make herself love you and feel safe around you. And other things that women have to go through to love someone. So there's no wonder that men go online, because there's no one in their lives normally who can give them sound dating advice. I mean, I know my dad certainly didn't give me sound dating advice. He told me, oh, just be nice, be a gentleman, and then you'll find a girlfriend. Which, thanks Dad, it's not very practical. And what I also found out from watching my dad is being nice and being gentlemanly doesn't necessarily get women to respond to you, because my dad is a very, I don't want to say cocky, but to some extent he is. He's a very flirty individual. He flirts with a tree, basically. He'll flirt with anything. And that got him very good responses from women, especially my mum. But I remember when I was younger, my dad picking me up from parties, and he would just be making all the women, all the mums laugh, whether they were hot or not, and they'd be very handsy with my dad. So as I got older, those memories flashed back to me, and it was like, what my dad's saying is BS, but what my dad's doing is not. So that's why lots of men go online to find dating advice, because the truth is, and I think this is true wherever you are, women don't come to you on a plate. But if you understand that and accept that, and you also accept that most women don't actually get approached that often. I mean, I even know hot women who are extremely hot, your 8s, your 9s, who don't get approached that often. If you can accept that sort of reality and get comfortable just hitting on women when you find them, when you're at a bar or something, or when you're engaged in another social activity, you're probably going to be more likely to get a girlfriend than not. And this is where the bad dating advice comes in, because you get lots of people saying, approach them here, say this, and to be honest, your corny pickup lines I don't think are very useful, especially if you're giving advice, because what women are receptive to will depend on where you are. So London girls, in my experience, you can mock a bit more and you can take the mick a bit more, whereas in Scotland, where I spend a significant amount of time, those girls probably aren't as responsive to teasing, especially not sophisticated teasing or something like that, whereas in London they are. also in London and places like that, you're more likely to find girls in certain places as opposed to others. For example, in a small city, you're not really going to find women at art galleries, whereas in London you might. So I think that aspect of dating advice is certainly worth considering and taking with a grain of salt. And the same reasoning also applies with why online relationship advice is so popular, because most of what men are taught about relationships is BS. I mean, there's the classic tradcon, oh, you should do everything for your wife's happiness should be your end goal and sole goal. That's obviously garbage, and I'll go into why. But the main reason why young men will drift or end up towards the Andrew Tate neck of the woods is because to some extent Andrew Tate is right, and he also shows proof that he's right. He has a harem of women who are extremely loyal to him. I mean, 2 women went to prison for him for 6 months and didn't testify or didn't make a deal and make something up to get out of prison. That is loyalty. That's the ultimate loyalty. But most men, I know I certainly was, are told that to have a good relationship you've got to be nice, and to some extent you do have to be. But the problem with being nice and being a gentleman is it only works if people are aware that you have the potential not to be. So I'll use the example of boys. When young boys are little, they fight a lot. There's lots of physical violence, and by the time they're young men, the experience of violence helps them form hierarchies and social structures when they get on and when they socialise. So it's very easy for young boys to come up with boundaries, or young men to be aware of boundaries, because they've had those boundaries enforced through violence with one another or the threat thereof. Whereas within relationships, that doesn't really happen with women. Women, for example, get away with a lot more than men. I mean, you can see this in the sentencing guidelines. In the UK, women are basically treated like children with by the justice system. That is to say, women who commit crime, even violent crime, even serious offences, are seen as victims as well, in the same way that children are. This leads to women getting lower sentences for the same crime. But in relationships and in other aspects of life, this is also true. Women are used to getting away with a lot more and being able to push boundaries in ways that men wouldn't be able to. And of course there are exceptions, but most women, if not most people, will push a boundary as far as you can go. And this is where it becomes difficult in relationships, because men don't actually have a mechanism other than leaving their girlfriend or leaving their wife, or the threat thereof, of enforcing boundaries. So we'll use an example. Let's say your girlfriend or your wife insults you in public or takes the mick out of you and your competence. That's quite a serious thing to do, especially if it's in front of other people, especially if it's in front of someone like your boss, because if someone does that, it might lead to your boss having a lower opinion of you, which will cost you money and impact your life. It will have repercussions that your girlfriend or wife, if they do that, probably hasn't considered and probably isn't able to consider. But back in the day, if someone had done that, or your wife had done that, you would have the rule of thumb. And I'm not saying I'm pro the rule of thumb, but it's an interesting thought exercise. You'd be able to wrap them across the knuckles with a ruler or something like that, completely within the law. It's important to note that the rule of thumb was a strict rule on proportionality. You couldn't beat your wife with a hammer or turn around and punch her, but you could wrap her across the knuckles with a small stick. And I think that's interesting, because if you're completely opposed to divorce, like I am, I'm a Catholic, it is an issue that you don't really have a means of enforcing boundaries. Because if your wife, for example, pushes your boundaries so much and you will not get a divorce, you've got no way of enforcing the boundaries once you're married. When you're dating, you can just leave them, or threaten to leave them and see how that works. But when you're married, and if you're Catholic like I am, there's no real way of enforcing boundaries because you can't leave them. It's completely against your religion. If you take your religion seriously, you're not going to do that. But it is an interesting problem. So someone like Andrew Tate, who suggests, or other pickup artists and people in that sphere who suggest, oh, whenever a woman's giving you trouble, you should just ignore them, or you should leave the house whenever someone's wanting to talk to you in a certain way, or you should be, I don't like the term manipulative because I think it's too vague, but you should preempt when they're going to complain about something or when they're going to try and push boundaries and guide them away from it, and use positive reinforcement on your wife or girlfriend. I don't think that kind of relationship advice is too bad, and I certainly understand why it's so popular, because if you're in the position that you don't want to get divorced, or you can't get divorced because you don't really have any leverage on your wife or girlfriend other than leaving them. So being perhaps a bit manipulative, a bit sly, is probably your only way of enforcing boundaries. What I'd also like to add is I do think there is some that women in general are quite opposed to men using soft power, and I think part of that is a learned fear, because women naturally do soft power. They develop it as children and they're able to use it quite well by adults, but I don't think they do it consciously, whereas men, when they learn soft power, how to use it, it's normally conscious, and if you're consciously using soft power, you can get better at it much more quickly than if you're not consciously using soft power. So I think it makes women uncomfortable, the idea of men using soft power, because if men get used to and practice using soft power, they can be far more powerful and radiate greater power levels than a woman could. I want to tie back into the men or women make men soft, because I think this is an interesting idea. If you are of the opinion, which I'm not, that the reason the West is going to shit is because of weak men, the idea that it's all women's fault does actually make sense. It is actually a logical opinion to hold. It's one that I don't hold, and it was brought up in last week's Women's Hour, and I do think it's a bit unfair, people blaming women for the decline of the West. But if you adopt that reasoning, that the reason the West is going to hell in a handcart is women make because of soft men, it is completely logical to blame women for the decline of the West, because women make men soft. Women have had policies enacted on their benefit that have disadvantaged men. So affirmative action, you've got lots of women who are just being shoved into professions that they wouldn't normally enter into. And I can completely understand why you're bitter about that, or why someone would be bitter about that. I mean, it annoys me. I had an interview for an internship, and the diversity and equity lead, who was a woman, a white middle-class woman, you could almost say she was a Karen, asked me why I'd applied for this position when you clearly have white privilege and you're taking away an opportunity for a woman or a BAME person. I won't tell you how I responded to that, but I responded to that. And I can certainly understand why, if you're getting asked questions like that, or your women BAME people are being given disproportionate opportunities to you, both in school or in work life, I can completely understand why you would internalise an overly simplistic view of the problem and just blame women for it. But I don't think you should, because it's in poor taste, and also it's overly simplistic and it's not actually the root cause of the problem. Thank you very much for watching. I'll leave my Substack down below with an article I wrote on weaponising women, because that goes into the point about women being treated more favourably by the justice system, and it goes into how that can be used for political gain. I'll also leave my email address, so if you want to contact me either regarding a video suggestion or something I've said that you disagree with or agree with and it's helped you, please let me know. Also, if you need public speaking tuition, I do that. Please email me and I'll give you a quote and see if I can help you. If I can't, I'll let you know over email. Thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely rest of the week, and thoughts and prayers to you all.